Ginine Capozzi, welcome to the conversation today.
Hi, thank you so much. It's great to be with you, John.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from New York. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about establishing ROTI, return on talent investment. You come to us with a great background in learning and development, training and development. And really, we're going to explore like how can we help establish this return on investment aspect, but in the learning and development space. That's something that often is lacking. We often throw trainings at various problems, and a lot of times we don't couch it, within this return on investment, these metrics, and that's really, really important. I'm from the training and development space as well, and that's one of the first places that often gets cut when we see an economic downturn, when companies are cutting their budgets. And I think there's good reason. Oftentimes we don't have really a lot we can show in terms of direct improvements, direct return on investment, and it's a cost center, right? And so if we can't show the value and it's a cost center, then of course it's going to end up getting cut. And so while I'm a true believer in the value of training and learning and development, it's our responsibility to make sure we can show that value, right? So we're going to unpack all of that together today, and I'm really excited for this conversation. As we get started, I wanted to share Ginine's bio with everybody. Ginine Capozzi is an L&D consultant, professional coactive coach, and owner of Knowledge Force Consulting. Ginine has made it her mission to revolutionize training solutions to power people and business. With a background in learning and development strategy, Ginine has over 15 years of industry experience, making her an ideal fit for working with your organization, and she works with so many different organizations around the country. Ginine, anything you would like to share by way of your background or personal context before we dive on into the conversation?
I just love everything. That's exactly accurate. And the one thing that I would love to add is that I brought Disrupt HR to Buffalo. So if anybody's familiar with the Disrupt HR organization, then you should check out some of the videos. It's another great way to do that. And it's nationwide, but our local chapter here in Buffalo has been shaking things up for the last 5 years. So it's pretty cool.
Very
Speaker
good
for that as well. So yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and dive on in. In the pre-interview, we were just chatting and you were telling me a little bit about the origins of ROTI. Why don't you share a little bit about that with the audience? Because I think that's a really interesting story.
Yeah, thanks for asking that great question. I think it just comes from this drive that over and over frequently I would hear from both sides. I would hear from business, training doesn't work. And then I would have participants come into the workshop settings or into training programs and think like, oh, this is going to be a waste of time, or I have to be a training today. It's taking me away from the real work. And out of that, continuous mindset of hearing that type of articulated frustration from both business and individuals, I thought, we've got to shake this up and do something differently. We have to help people recognize the incremental change that we would celebrate, let's say in the manufacturing space, which is where I get my background and footing from, where we would look at something and saying, wow, we had a 1% change here, would be celebrated. But when we look at that from an individual contributor perspective, we have a mindset that 1% is failure. And trying to shift, how can we bring some light and shine some light on the conversation of what a talent investment really can unlock. And that was really my background. I just got so frustrated with it. I thought we've got to figure out a different way to measure it, because traditional ROI financial metrics just don't work in human dynamics. And so ROTI began to evolve in my thought process.
Yeah, well, I like that. And of course, we all are familiar with ROI, and that's something we hear all the time. Some people may kind of get a little bit, cringy when they hear that, especially if you're more on the people side and you're not into the metrics and whatever, you may not like that term, and that's fine. You don't have to like the term, but you do have to speak the language of business, and you do have to be able to converse with people who make the decisions and people who are sitting around the table holding the purse strings, right? And
Absolutely.
whether you like the term or not, they like the term, and they are the ones that you have to convince, right?
Right.
And so return on investment or return on talent investment, that's really key. I like also what you said about, if we think about other places where we seek improvement, if we look at quality improvements, or we look at reducing waste, or we look at reducing defects or things like that, oftentimes a 1% or 2% decrease in waste, or 1% or 2% increase in quality, those are huge. Like that can
Yeah.
amount to an enormous amount of cost savings or increased revenue or whatever. So when we're talking about it in terms of uh, how we work as individuals, as performers within the organization, as people, that is also huge. But sometimes we can't really see it, right?
Yeah,
Um,
that's exactly
so,
it.
as an learning and development professional, prior to moving into the higher ed space, that's something that I would often think about. Now, longtime listeners of the podcast, I bring this up from time to time. I'm a professor. That's my main gig. I am at the university, but I still do consulting work. I still do L&D work in corporate settings as well. But one thing that I'm always telling professors in my department is, let's just work to be, I usually say 5%, but let's like work to be 5% better. Like we don't
Right.
need to be 100% better. We don't need to be 50% better. We don't need to be 10% better. Like let's just strive to be 5% better. Like if you can just be a little bit better consistently, the change is dramatic, right? And that's really to your point.
It
And
is.
sometimes it gets lost on people because that incremental improvement is hard to see,
Mhm.
and and so then we just it just fades away, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it can be challenging to measure, right? And it's hard to recognize how a program or skill development in, for example, difficult conversations, something related to
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
where I, as a leader, have learned to and embrace getting ahead of it, taking initiative, taking the lead, um, capturing or that conversation or engaging that conversation when something is smaller, so that I can get ahead of it. It's very difficult to measure the impact of the fact that I did it early versus waiting till I did it late. But those are continued types of things that we can look at and say, wow, that actually changes things. So
Hmm.
an ROTI, so to what is important to me around the ROTI measurement is that really looking at things from a holistic perspective. What is the what in the financials is what learning and development has struggled to make direct correlations and connections to, right? And so because of that, we sometimes don't measure. I often say that that's a mistake. Let's look at other aspects of the organization that we can make connections to. So use an example of quality and quality control and enhancing that area. Well, if we can connect that we've got a baseline of something here, and we've now
Hmm.
are going to establish that as one of our key indicators and our key metrics. So we're going to look at, we're going to connect that to a training solution or a learning and development program or coaching or something related to that L&D space. And we connect those two things together. We start with our benchmark and we bench line, and we begin to build from there and continue to measure and say, okay, now I can't ever say in human dynamics that one training or 2 hours
Yeah.
of learning has a direct connection. I can't say that it is causation, but I certainly can say that there is correlation. And as we start to measure that and understand it in different perspectives and look at things holistically, we can see that the investment really does shift from that cost center mindset. And I appreciate that you use that word, because L&D often is viewed as just a cost center, a thing that we have to do that costs us money, instead of looking at it and saying, how do we use it as a profit center?
Hmm.
What are we doing in a way to shift the mindset through training that drives profit for us, whether that's by reducing costs or increasing sales or whatever that number might look like. It's also looking at it from the perspective of, like I started to say, the who, what, when, or why. We mostly spend our time in the what, but if I look at the how and use training to say, what are the 15 new processes that we were able to enhance or improve upon this year as a result of what we were doing with our people, that starts to connect as well. I can look at it from the perspective of hiring or turnover or time to competence, and look at it from the human dynamics. We know today more than ever the the happiness factors, I like to call it. How am I feeling about the place that I am working? Those metrics matter significantly to collaboration and accomplishment and acceptance of
Mhm.
change, things that we've studied and appreciate that you and your academics would have studied in a variety of ways that drive business. And last but not least, strategy. And I think that by pulling some other ways that L&D can be measured, it benefits business, but it benefits L&D professionals as well, because it's a way for us to argue that we shouldn't be the first thing cut in an economic downturn,
Absolutely.
right? And so I my thought on this ROTI model is not revolutionary in my mind, but I look at it and just say, why aren't we doing it then? And I think that why we're not doing it is because people don't pause and get ahead of it and say, we're going to be really strategic about it. What I have also found in L&D is that it can be very reactionary. There's a problem, and so we offer a solution, whether that's training, coaching, but we don't necessarily connect the two things to say, what is our overall business strategy for the next 18, 24, 36 months? And how are we going to start to bend the curve and take control of this through learning initiatives? And so those were really another philosophy of mine kind of starts to bend into this process and match up, which is something I call the power of one, which is the power of one conversation, one idea, one
Mm.
action to change everything. And I really feel like when we blend together those two concepts, you could start to use learning and development and unleashing the power of people in order to achieve business goals. And
Mhm.
ultimately, I think that helps most people achieve their own personal goals.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You mentioned earlier, um, so many of us, I certainly I've been in this boat where I've gone to trainings that I'm just like sitting there. Why in the world am I sitting through this? Like the disconnect. I just don't see it. I feel like I'm wasting my time. Probably
Mhm.
everyone in the room is wasting their time. I don't see the connection between what they're having me do and how this is going to help improve, my work, right? And so if I'm thinking it, probably everyone else is thinking it, which probably, even if there is some value in what they're having us do, the fact that that's my mindset probably, takes away almost any value that could have been there.
Right.
And so the fact that that is often the case in a lot of trainings, and there's that resistance to a lot of trainings, also speaks to a big part of the problem. So a lot of times in L&D, we have this problem of there not being like a clear from the very beginning. Like there needs to be foundation built upon like a connection to the business strategy, a clear
Yes.
understanding of like what are the core objectives of the training, and how is that connected to a business problem, the business strategy, and what are the desired outcomes of this training, and like how are you
Yes.
going to assess it, and then how are we going to communicate that to the people that are going to be involved in this training. um,
Right.
in my experience, the vast majority of trainings that happen for the vast majority of employees don't have any of that.
Yeah,
You, you
absolutely.
you 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 just you just are asked to show up to a training, and you have no idea why. If you're lucky, you might get an agenda, but usually you don't even get that. You just get like a calendar
And meeting
invite that says
invite.
show up for half a day or whatever. And so
Right.
it's no wonder that people are skeptical, that people are annoyed because they're being pulled away from like other important things. And it's no wonder that oftentimes upper management is like, why are we doing this? Why are we spending money on this? Look at the opportunity cost alone that's
Yes.
that this is that we're incurring because of this. So if anyone listening can resonate with what I just said and that experience, you know, that is low hanging fruit of like things you can fix immediately.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then of course, connecting it then clearly to this ROI or this return on talent investment, some of these specific metrics that you just identified. And there's a whole slew of different things depending on what you're doing training on that you can attach it to. Then, I mean, it really is not that complicated, not that hard to be able to make the business case for a training if you do the groundwork first. If you have the foundation there from the beginning, and then you can really make the case not only to management, but to the people that are involved in the training. And then they can understand why they're there, why it matters, how it's going to help them be successful in their jobs. And then even those who are a little bit resistant will at least understand, oh, ultimately this will be helpful, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with everything that you just said so much more than I already do. I think the thing about training too is people anticipate that we're bringing them there to change them. And a colleague of mine who I respect very much, his nickname is Jim Clark. He always says it's not that people don't want to change; it's that they don't want to be changed.
Mm.
And that change is something done from the inside out. And I respect him so much. But I remember the first time I heard him say that, I thought, wow, Jim, that's true. And so going into training programs, whether they are online in an e-learning situation or they're a live classroom event, people really walk in a bit hesitant to go, what are you going to make me do different? My job is already challenging. I'm already busy. I'm already overworked.
Yeah.
And when we reframe it to say, the only thing I ask of you, and I say this all the time, the only thing I ask of you is to think about 5 minutes a day that could be different. 5 minutes a day is a 1% change on your week, and on your compounding interest of that throughout the course of the year is going to land you in a very different place. If I had to track an airplane from Buffalo, New York to the Salt Lake City area, and I was off by a 1%, I would be nowhere near the state of Utah by the time I was done, right? And that, when I think about that, we stumble into things so haphazardly many times. And by walking into a program that I just have a mindset with of I'm going to pull something intentional that I can implement for 5 minutes on my day. And I'm at the point where 5 minutes every day doesn't even have to happen. If we want to start with 5 minutes a week, I'm good with that too, because that incremental change that compounds with each other makes a difference. So individuals, even soft skills, for example, I can identify metrics that I want to have for myself. It could be, and I'm having a difficult conversations workshop this week, and so it's top of mind, but I'm working with individuals there to say, have you been tracking how many conversations that you suspect you need to have? Have you tracked how many you've actually had over a window of time? And now let's be able to track how many you have down the road, not to be slapping everybody's hands and having all these nasty performance conversations. What I mean by it is, have you embraced it in a way that it becomes just part of a continuous culture to be talking about things that are hard and what we could be doing in a different way? There are some times that the metric I want to measure needs to go up. And as a result of having more frequent conversations, are the scale of the problems that I am engaging with smaller? That's evidence that what you've taken from a program has translated into behavior change. So I now can ripple that into working very closely with HR, for example, and saying, have we had a reduction overall company-wide of, performance improvement plans or scenarios that have had to be intervened with HR? And those types of things can help us extrapolate data to say, I think that something here might be working and something might be beneficial here. And so I just, I don't know. I think that there's ways for us to be just thinking about what we want to be doing in order to make things better for everybody and be able to connect and prove the value for L&D. But to me, it's not just to prove my value in the business. It's to be able to know that there is significant change and impact for others. And the philosophy of this came from a real quick story, if I could share with you, from many years ago. I was doing work with Time Warner Cable back when they were Time Warner. They're no longer, as that organization. But way back when, I was involved in a training program with an individual. It was some sales intervention. And this lady was amazing. She was always kind of middle of the pack, but she cared. She was trying. And 6 months later, after going through a program and working with her, she came running up to me the next time I was in the office. And if anybody who's had this moment where someone kind of comes at you and says hello and, oh my gosh, I've been waiting to see you. And I'm like, hi, nice to see you too. And she's like, oh my gosh, I just have to tell you, my daughter, she's in music lessons. And I did that thing where you're like, racking your brain for, am I supposed to remember this? And she like, it gets a little flustered. He goes, oh, no, I'm so sorry. You wouldn't know this. But my daughter had been asking me for music lessons and I just couldn't afford them. But once I took that training class, I was consistently hitting bonus. I've been doing so well. She's now been able to take her music classes. And I just want to say thank you because that training really mattered. And it made me feel really good, right? And it just reminded me the power of what that change can look like has a very significant ripple effect. That was for her daughter, her individually, and of course the organization ultimately was benefiting from that individual success as well. And so when we think about doing that in a way that's more strategic and more intentional, we give people opportunity to see that they are being successful and that it doesn't just have to feel like the scary version of ROI, which could be viewed as numbers, they don't care about people. But when I'm looking at other measurements, then I'm recognizing that people are more than just this one flat perspective, that I can bring them into a full dimensional experience if I can look at the measurements of their success as well as the business success holistically.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great story. And you're absolutely right. The ripples can be tremendous. And so if we have like an aversion to metrics, or we have an aversion to analytics, or to like this idea of ROI or whatever, let's remember that having a seat at the table matters. And so speaking the language matters. Having funding so we can do these types of programs matter, right? So that we can have these ripple effects. And so all of this goes together. I was wondering, maybe with the time we have remaining, any thoughts on, because I guess none of what we're saying is particularly new, these are the types of conversations that I think people have been having for a long time, yet the problem persists. Like, I think people know we need to attach training to metrics. I think they know that we should connect it to ROI whenever possible. And yet we still have the same challenge. Why do you think that's the case? Like, why do you think organizations, and particularly L&D professionals, often are so resistant to this? Yeah, why does this problem persist so much?
Great question. I suspect that there's a bit of fear that what if I offer, or what if we do this training and it doesn't succeed? That the numbers don't move. Is that actually going to pull my funding? Is it going to make things worse? And I really don't believe that. I believe that that's what significantly drives it. And this idea that they're afraid that the metrics aren't going to match. The ROTI method enables you to find quantitative and qualitative metrics. And my experience with clients is that helps reduce some of the concerns or the fears that we're actually going to find out the training doesn't work. I think that another component is that people are not sure which metrics to measure, or they're not entirely responsible for the metrics. Right. Yeah. And so I'm heavily dependent upon, for example, the quality department is going to know their metrics, but are they going to know which metric is being tied to human behavior, and what's that going to look like? But what I've experienced is that it's through trial and error that we begin to understand the metrics that matter to our business. And oftentimes that starts with looking at the business's metrics for the year. If we're looking to increase sales in an area, okay, well then what skills do we know that people need in order to work on improved selling? Can we do a pilot program with a control group, so that we've got one group that has gone through program, other people who haven't, and what metrics come out of that we can see? So I think that the hesitation initially is fear. The second hesitation is really know-how. And the third hesitation is the dependency on other departments and having to get them baseline data to be working with. And so I offer to L&D professionals, if you're out there listening, is to start with your own. Pick your own, look at some qualitative ones as much as you are looking at quantitative ones. So what are some qualitative things? Start with individuals just self-assessing their skills. Create a mini self-assessment that says, how would I rate myself on a scale of 1 to 6 or 1 to 7, thinking about various metrics in this area. How do I see it happening? Or let's look at it through the lens of language versus numbers. How could I know as an individual that my boss saw change in me? What could I imagine hearing them say or do? Right. And if I can start with just individuals working even within my own programs, I can start to now pull out kernels of experiential data and people connecting some of the work. And I think that sometimes can be a building block. You also said, what is anything maybe small that somebody could get started with, even like you said, the very basics of showing up to a training program. Sometimes our leaders don't have the knowledge even of what we're going into training for, right? It's getting pushed from higher up. Management is supposed to pick 4 or 5 people to go. They identify who goes, and there's a disconnect there. I would offer that L&D can educate middle management, even those who don't go, about behaviors that they want to be looking for or noticing, and having some connected conversations. And that way it's like, oh, I didn't know why Ginine changed. Something was new, versus, oh, I can connect Janine's shift to the training that we sent her to. And so I think that there's that piece. And I think that conversation, even at the individual level, there's a lot of data that shows that if a manager sets a goal with an individual, they have a conversation about that being the focus for their program and the reason they go through this training program, whatever modality it's delivered in. And that there is a conversation that follows up with, what did you learn? What is your intentions to sustain, and how can I support you? You will see that those smaller portions of incremental reinforcement occur. And as we said, 1% change on a human dynamic is actually a significant ripple effect. Where if I look at it from manufacturing, 1% is 1%, it stays the same. But in human dynamics, it's actually an exponential change.
Yeah. Ginine, this has just been a really fascinating conversation. I appreciate all of your insights. As we start to wrap up, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, where they can find out more information, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, sounds wonderful. So I have my 2 websites. Personally, you can visit me at GinineCapozzi.com. And again, at Knowledge Force Consulting to learn more about the business. And LinkedIn is always a great place to connect. If you've heard me on the podcast here, drop me a note and say that's how you've heard. I would love that. And I guess my last thought is, don't be afraid to measure. You will be surprised how much success you are already experiencing through training and development. It's that we have a view that everything has to change in order for change to be kicked off and initiated. And an ROTI measurement method will help you see that isn't the case. Oh, and one last thing. If they want to actually do a little bit of an assessment of where they are on the ROTI metrics, they can actually access a downloadable from my website that allows them to kind of check the boxes and see where they are and where they stand today, and offer opportunities for improvement.
Perfect. Ginine, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Ginine can do for you. Check out the resources on the website. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great